When we hear the name Casanova, we think of the most famous seducer in history: adventurer, gambler, tireless lover. But what if I told you that more than a seducer, Casanova was a narcissist of the 18th century, a man whose ego, manipulation, and lack of empathy were recorded for eternity, and then projected into an imaginary world where everything forbidden was legal? The term narcissism comes from Greek mythology. Narcissus, the young man who fell in love with his own reflection. If you want me to make a video about this character from Greek mythology, write Narcissus in the comments. Today, we speak of narcissists as self-centered, manipulative people who lack empathy, victimize themselves, and always seek to be right. Casanova embodied many of these traits, and he wrote it down so that everyone could read it timelessly. Giacomo Geronimo Casanova was born in 1725 in Venice, son of actors, and initially educated in religious seminaries and law studies. From a young age, he showed insatiable curiosity and a natural talent for adventure and experimentation in different fields. He was a violinist, writer, spy, diplomat, and compulsive gambler. He traveled all over Europe, frequenting salons, courts, and secret societies, always seeking pleasure, status, and new conquests. Perhaps being the son of actors gave him the ability to create different characters that adapted perfectly to circumstances. Let's focus first on his autobiography called History of My Life. In it, he boasts of his conquests, describes his manipulations, and clearly shows a lack of empathy towards his lovers. Promiscuous and charming, he conquered many women, 120 according to him, and narrates this in the work as a feat without any kind of guilt, having in mind that he finished writing this biography when he was already old, at 73 years of age. He shows no remorse. It is a totally egocentric narration. His relationship with Livin was not only about desire, but also about convenience. Many times, they were his source of money and support to continue traveling and gambling. If any of them complained or suffered, he found a way to blame her and justify his own ego. Each story turned his behavior into an achievement, and the suffering of others into a simple accessory to his story. His autobiography is not just an account of romances. It can also be read today as a portrait of 18th century narcissism, where his personal life is turned into literature to glorify his own ego. A few years earlier, at 63 years old, he wrote Icosameron, a 12-volume novel, almost unreadable today because of its size and complexity, a utopian science fiction work where everything forbidden in his time becomes legal: free sex, incest permitted, promiscuity without guilt, and a people with a very particular sexuality who knows neither jealousy nor marriage. It seems like a rebellion against the education he received. We must keep in mind that this is the 18th century, a Christian era in Europe where incest, apart from being a sin, was punishable by law. Let's not forget that Casanova received a religious education and later studied law. And at this point, you may ask, why was it not banned by censorship like other works of his time? Well, no, it was not censored. He said what was forbidden and was not punished. First, he wrote it in French, not in Italian, which limited its circulation. And besides, he published it in Prague, far from the stricter censorship centers. And due to its length and complexity, the audience was very limited, which allowed him to express his most hidden desires without risk of reprisals. In other words, Casanova created a world where his excesses were not sin, but virtue. What in the 18th century Christian Europe was considered a condemned sin, in the Icosameron became the natural norm. All of this allowed him to project a universe where his behavior was untouchable and glorified, showing another facet of his narcissism. In real life, Casanova left behind a trail of wounded and disappointed lovers. He replaced them when they ceased to be useful or interesting to him. In his autobiography, it is clear, his own pleasure and ego were always first, while the emotional consequences for others did not matter. The Icosameron is the projection of that same narcissism, a world where no one can reproach him, where his desires and behavior are law, and where the guilt and suffering of others disappear. Thus, while history remembers Casanova as the great seducer, we must also see him as a narcissist who used his literature to justify his life. His autobiography reveals the real man, manipulative and egocentric, and the Icosameron, his idealized world where everything society considered sin is celebrated. It is the perfect combination of narcissism, imagination, and strategy. A man who turned his ego into literature and his fantasy into a universe without censor.